Alright, so in this video I'm going to show you how to display websites in your Flutter app. This could be useful, for example, if you have some settings screens that you maybe already have in one of your web apps and you want to just present them to the users without rebuilding it in Flutter again, or if you maybe want to help navigate users to a specific link, but you don't want them to use the browser, you want them to stay in the app. That type of stuff can be useful in a Flutter app. Or for example, in one of the apps I built, we had a reset password screen where you would basically submit all of that, and we already had that built. So instead of rebuilding it again in the Flutter app, I just put that in a web view and it all worked great. So right now here I'm displaying my YouTube channel in the web view. And you can basically display any website. It's that simple. So to achieve this, we're going to use the Webview Flutter plugin. This is an official package. It's published by flutter.dev, which is basically the Flutter team, I believe. So it's an official package. It's a solid package, updated all the time. Now it's null safe for the latest Flutter version, so on and so forth. So let's just copy here the package name and go into Visual Studio Code. So here I just have a blank Flutter application with a home page, and we're going to build on top of this to build the web view and that type of stuff. So go into our pubspec.yaml file, and here under dependencies paste the WebView Flutter latest version. At the time of recording this, it's 208. And after I save this, it's going to automatically install the package because I'm using Visual Studio Code. If you're not, if you're using Android Studio, it should also work automatically. And if you're not using that, you will probably have to run the command manually for getting the packages. So first, I'm just going to start with the basics. I'm going to show off a couple of things that this WebView package provides. It provides very great control over how your users are going to use the web view. You can, for example, restrict some pages. You can also initiate communication between the website itself and your app. I'm going to show that off later, but for now, I'm just going to do the same thing I did here, display my YouTube channel. So I'm actually just going to close down this app and start building. So the Webview plugin basically provides us with a WebView widget. So that's what we're going to use. Okay, and now there I'm going to press Control Space and see the options that we have. So the first option we're going to use is the initial URL parameter, which just places you on a certain URL. So I'm just going to say initial URL, and I'm going to paste the URL of my channel. Okay, that should be it. So now I'm going to save this, and I'm going to press F5 to run the app in my emulator. Okay, so the app is up and running, but as you see, the YouTube page is not loading. And that's because by default, WebView disables or restricts JavaScript very heavily. If you don't know what JavaScript is, it's just the code that is used in web apps to run on the client side and basically give dynamic functionality to websites such as YouTube. And YouTube uses JavaScript very heavily, and it cannot really work without it. So here in WebView configuration, we can say JavaScript mode, I believe. Yeah, and we can say JavaScript mode. And you can say disabled, which is the default value, which means no dynamic code of a website is getting executed inside the WebView. Or unrestricted, basically letting it do whatever it needs to do. So we'll just say unrestricted, save. And I'm going to restart the app as well. Okay, and now it loaded up my YouTube channel perfectly. So yeah, there are some cases where you might want to disable JavaScript, because JavaScript can sometimes run maybe some dangerous code if your user visits some suspicious websites. But for the most part, you're going to be good by leaving JavaScript mode unrestricted, especially if you're letting your users see only the websites you know that are safe. And I'm going to show you next how you can do that. So what you can do here in WebView, there are a lot of events that WebView triggers. So whenever a page is started, whenever a page is finished, whenever there is an error, when the WebView is first created, there are some other, actually no, that's it. Also, there is a navigation delegate where we can basically allow or disallow our users from going to a certain page. And let me show you how to do that. So you just put in the navigation delegate parameter, and in here you declare a function, say that it has one parameter, which is navigation request, call it request, and that has to return a navigation decision, which is an enumerator. So if you take a look at here, navigation delegate is just a function that takes in a navigation request and returns a navigation decision, or a future or a navigation decision. So that's what we're going to do here. So by default, you can just let your users go to whichever page you want by not even having this parameter. But if you have this parameter, you can just say return navigation decision dot navigate. And this will let your user go to whichever page they want to go to. And now here we can run some custom logic with preventing our users from going to random pages. For example, I can say, let's see, where can I get to from YouTube? I'm not sure. Actually, let's try a different example. So I'm going to go on just having google.com. And if a user tries to go to YouTube, I'm just going to prevent it. So I'm going to say if request.url, let's say starts with, or actually let's say contains youtube.com. What you can also do is match them exactly by saying if request.url is equal to youtube.com. But if it contains something else like a URL of the video or whatever, it won't work. So this really depends on the logic you need. But for this simple example, this is going to be enough. We'll say if request.url contains youtube.com, I'm going to return a navigation decision, but here it's going to be prevent. And in any other case, I'm going to let them navigate. So now I'm going to save this and reload this. And okay, we're on google.com, so I'm now just going to Google YouTube, going here. And I'm going to try to navigate to YouTube. Actually, I'm going to put a breakpoint here. So a navigation delegate function is getting executed every time a navigation is about to occur inside the web view. So when you're about to go to a different page, navigation delegate executes, and there you can basically say you can go here, but you cannot go here. So I'm now going to try to go to YouTube, and here it is, it hit the navigation delegate. And now request.url is equal to m.youtube.com. So I'm just going to say F10, and yeah, here it's going to return navigation decision.prevent. Press F5 to continue, go back into the app, and nothing happens. So it just prevents us from going there. What we could also do is maybe show the user a pop-up of, hey, you cannot go to YouTube or whatever. So you have total control over what you want to do. We can also have a reverse type of logic where you can say, okay, if request URL contains youtube.com and contains google.com, we're going to say navigate, otherwise we're going to say prevent. So now you can only go to websites that contain youtube.com or google.com, which goes back to the thing that I said previously. You can restrict to where your users are going to go to ensure that they're going on to safe websites, so that they're not going on to some crazy websites in your app that's going to cause them problems. Okay, so the page is not loading, so I messed up the logic. I said if it contains youtube.com and if it contains google.com. I'm just going to change that to or, and now that's going to work. Let me refresh the app. So yeah, that works. And also I want to touch on one of the things here. So since when you add a web view to your app, you have absolute control over where a user can go, and you can also see everything that your user is doing. Not everything, but you can kind of get a basic idea. For example, here we have a parameter called onPage started and onPage finished. And here we can maybe go, it takes in a URL parameter, so you know exactly where your user is going. And that also goes for the onPage finished event. So we can also take in a URL. And you also have an event for when the web view is created. But here, when a page is started and a page is finished, if you want to, you can basically track your users' behaviors, how long their sessions last in certain websites, which websites are they going to, so on and so forth. And this is one of the things that apps like Instagram and Facebook are doing. Because if you notice, if you click on the link on Instagram or Facebook, they don't pop you into an external browser, but they open their internal web view, their internal browser, and they basically track everything they can track. They track where you've been, how long you've been there, so on and so forth. And this is why Webview can be very powerful for those types of apps that for some reason need that type of information, or for some other uses like showing basic setting screens or reset password screens. And now that we're on the topic of quote-unquote tracking and whatever, one way that a lot of websites can try to fingerprint your device or see who you are and whatever is by getting your user agent to see what device you're using, on which platform, so on and so forth. And we can very easily see that with a website called What's My User Agent. So I'm just going to put that now as the initial URL here, just so we can immediately go to that website. And also I'm going to comment out the whole navigation delegate because right now I do not want to restrict access to any websites. So I'm just going to save that and restart the app. Okay, and now we're on this website, and basically here says what is my user agent. It has a lot of ads, but whatever. It says Mozilla 5.0, Linux, Android. It gives my phone, I believe this is the name of the phone or the code of the phone, and it has some information that can be used, for example, in some website fingerprinting, in some device fingerprinting, or so on and so forth. And if you want to protect your users from that, or basically represent them as something else, you can set the user agent in the web view right here, just saying user agent. And I'm just going to copy a random user agent I found, so it gives off a different user agent. So if you remember, this is the user agent we have right now. It's Linux, Android 11, SDK, GPhone, so on and so forth. But when I restart the app, it reloaded the website and it shows my user agent. It says now Mozilla, Windows 10, so on and so forth. So that's a way you can maybe try to protect your users from tracking, or maybe some websites work on some user agents better than the others or whatever, or whichever reason you may have, that's a thing. You can do that, Webview allows that. So that's a pretty cool feature. Okay, and there is one final feature of the Webview that I want to show. Actually, there are kind of like two features right now because I'm going to show two features. One of them is basically giving you the ability to not have to set whatever the URL is. So your website doesn't have to be live, but you can directly put HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in here and execute it locally for whatever reason. And that's one thing I'm going to do right now. So I just copied and pasted some example HTML. If you're not a web developer, you don't have to worry about this. So this is just a standard HTML5 document with a title and with a body and just one button in there that says click me. We're going to do something with this button later, but let's first just display this. So what we need to do to display this is use the onWebViewCreated method. So this is another event that is fired by the WebView upon its initialization, so when it's created. And that is just a function that gives us a WebView controller. And with that controller, we can control what's going on with the page. So controller has a lot of options, but the one we're interested in is giving it a manually set content. And the way we're going to do that is by first encode this raw HTML into base64. So the way we're going to do that is say final string content base64. So basically saying that our HTML content in base64 format. You can name it whatever you want. And we'll say base64 encode. And this automatically imported the Dart convert package. And if it didn't for you, you will have to do that manually. And that takes in an array of bytes. But since we have a string, we need to convert that string to an array of bytes. So we'll just say const utf8 encoder dot convert. and we're going to convert our HTML here to that. So we're going to say example HTML. And that's it. We converted this to basics4, to a long basics4 string. Actually, I don't think it's that long. But the reason we did this now is we can embed that basics4 in a certain URL format and just load it as a URL for this web view. So we can say webviewController.load URL. And here we can put in any URL we want, like what'smyuseragent.com, or we can make a URL out of a basics4 string. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use this format. We're going to say data:\text/HTML, and then put a semicolon, then say basics4, then say comma, and in there we're going to embed the basics4 content. And since this, we can make this an asynchronous function and await it over here. So that's everything we need to do. And now this will render this HTML as a web page. So now I'm going to save this and reload the app. And now the app is up and running, and that's it. We have our custom HTML here with a button that says click me, and it doesn't do anything pretty much. So yeah, that's basically how to display your custom HTML. You just format the URL like this, convert your HTML to basics4, and embed it like this. So for example, if we manage to get our hands on this basics4 string, we can also do this in our browser by ourselves, just copy paste it as a URL and it will work. So yeah, that was one feature that I wanted to show, but now there is a different feature. And that's basically to get this web page that we are developing, that we have here, to interact with our app. So now I'm going to be writing some HTML and some JavaScript. And if you're not a web developer, you really don't need to worry about this part. But if you are also making your web app that's going to be embedded in here, you should pay attention. So above the body, I'm going to add a script tag and also close it. And I'm also going to declare one function that's just going to be called my function. So this is JavaScript, this is not Dart, the syntax is different. And in here, I'm just going to say Flutter app.post message, and I'll just say hello. And the reason that I wrote this the way I did, so this is just a function, whatever, and this here is the format, or this is basically the code we need to execute inside the Flutter web view for Flutter to pick it up and give us an event. Later I'm going to show you how to subscribe to that event and actually process it. And now the only thing we need to do is add an onClick event to this function, to this button actually, I'm sorry, to call this function, which is then going to call this specific Flutter code, or actually this is just random JavaScript code, that's then going to trigger an event in our web view here. So I'm just going to say onClick is equal to my function, open closed, and that's it. So now I'm going to save and reload the app. And yeah, now the app is up and running again and nothing has changed. I click on the button, nothing happens, obviously. Now I'm going to show you how to subscribe to this event. So we can do this very basically through something called JavaScript channels. So here it takes, the web view takes in a parameter of JavaScript channels that is a set of unique JavaScript channels. So let's now create a set using JavaScript channel and putting in this syntax that you may use for a map. And a set is basically an array of unique elements. We can think of it like that. And now let's create the JavaScript channel. Say JavaScript channel, and let's give it a name. And I'm going to call it Flutter app. And the reason I'm calling it the Flutter app is because this and this needs to match. So if I wanted to call it my great app, I'd call it here my great app, and when I wanted to call my Flutter code from JavaScript, I'd say here my great app dot post message hello. And now the second parameter we need to initialize for JavaScript channel is on message received. And that is a function that takes in a JavaScript message, and now we can do whatever we want. We can show a pop-up, we can take our user to a different page, we can just log something if we want to, and that's what we're going to do now. We're just going to say print JavaScript called, and that's it. That's all we need. And also, it's worth to mention that you can do this with different JavaScript channels. You can add another JavaScript channel that's maybe for some other purpose, and you can call it something else. And you can also call it in this code, and so on and so forth. So you can do this as many times as you need to for as many different purposes that you may need to. So now I'm going to save the app and reload it. And also I'm going to put a debugger breakpoint here so we can hit that breakpoint once we click on the button and receive the message. Okay, so we're in the app. I'm going to click on the JavaScript, on the HTML button. Click, and there it is. We got the message, and the message was hello, just as we set up here. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Also, it's worth to mention that you do not have to do this with your custom HTML directly in the app. You can also do this with a live website. So if a website has JavaScript that does what we're doing here, you can do it just as simply without the on Webview created, just add the initial URL to that website. This is typically going to be your website that you specifically want to communicate with the app. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you learned something new. I hope that this is going to be useful for you in one of your apps. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, comment, and subscribe. Support the channel by just doing that. Comment if you have any questions, concerns, complaints. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll see you next time.